I hate it when in social media the idea is created that we have two options.
Yeah.
Either competent black professionals but rogue
Yeah.
versus incompetent and clean.
Yeah.
Because I was there in the civil service
Absolutely.
when there was competent
Yeah. Yeah.
and
clean.
and clean. Success is not going to come from a certificate that's hanging on a wall.
Yeah.
You have to have excellence.
Yeah.
You have to anyway, something that rattled me a little bit, you would say, it's not BEE that's going to get you wealthy.
Yeah.
What's going to get you wealthy is an excellent spirit,
Yeah.
working effectively.
Are we heading towards a failed state? Welcome to Citizens Talk, where we will be getting ideas from opinion shapers in South Africa, people who share views that we think change the conversations that happen in the country, and over time they might change the course of history. My name is Jan Mokhanwa. We formed Citizens, you remember, because we wanted to excite and engage more professionals and the youth to be involved in building a better South Africa. The line we've been going with is, you might have been saying for all along that you're not interested in politics, but certainly politics are very much interested in you. You'll know that on our website, citizens.org, we've identified what we believe to be 7 priorities for South Africa, and they range from issues around crime and corruption and looting, the economy, education, social transformation, the digital revolution, and other forms of funding for state, because a lot of parties talk about how they should redistribute, spend money on this or the other, but very little on how is the state going to generate the income required to be able to do all of that. But we are careful not to be getting drunk on our own Kool-Aid. So what you will know about Citizens is we value other people's input. We are clear that we are not experts in all areas, and the Citizens Talk is a series of conversations with people who are experts in their field. And therefore today, I'm very, very excited to be bringing you a guest. They will do much of the introduction themselves, but he's a guy you have seen many times on your screens, small screens, big screens, one of the massive opinion shapers of what happens in South Africa, Dr. Mtimka.
Jan,
welcome, brother.
Thank you. You do know that flattery is a sin, right?
They say flattery works even if everyone knows it's not true, but it still works. Yeah. But I have not added any color to it. Thank you very much for joining us and helping us start to make sense of what is actually happening in South Africa. I've said in the introduction, the idea for us is until we get to excite the tax base, the skill base of South Africa, then we are going to be leaving a very important constituency. So thank you for the time. Our conversations today, while we have identified these priorities, we will bring people who go deep in any particular area, but sometimes we are lucky we've got a guest that can give us the breath, right? And I have one in front of me.
Jan, thank you so much. I'm really honored to be on your platform. I've looked at your background in terms of leadership, where you've been. It's really time that people like you, who actually have got skin in the game, do this kind of work. You cannot inspire people to achieve what you say without the skin in the game that says, I've been there, done that, and got the t-shirt.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure. So we are going to be talking about, of course, the political landscape, economic issues in South Africa. It might touch on the usual stuff, land issues, tribalism, race, and all of that. what do we need to know about you that informs the lens through which we
Okay.
live? We all have our biases.
Okay.
So tell us about you and what informs your lens on the issues
Sure.
in South Africa.
Sure.
And then what are you working on at the moment so that we understand the person?
Sure. So you've now triggered me, and I can speak very long about who I am and with the lens through which I look at things. I was born to a 19-year-old mother and a 21-year-old father. While they were fooling around, really, they weren't married. So they had no business making a child.
Yeah.
But I'm glad I was born back then. I'm now 41. And I'd had a paternal grandfather whom I will forever be proud about until I reach until I die.
Yeah.
Ponzi Jackson Mtimka, said to be of a German father and a Xhosa woman, but fully Xhosa in his growing up. And this guy was very industrious. I mean, he woke us up I was 8 when I met my paternal family and went to live with them. And Utamkulu had this rim that he hung on a tree in our yard. And at 5 a.m., he would go and hit this ring, and this was supposed to be our alarm.
Yeah.
And everybody had to wake up at that time.
Yeah.
And we start the chores before we go to school, 5 a.m., do all the chores. He was a farmer, both at home and in a farm that he bought.
Yeah.
He has a title deed for it. Really proud about the work that he did. So I was raised by a farmer.
Yeah.
Now, in the village that I grew up in, which is Kwalubalele village in Paddy, these were the remnants of an agrarian system.
Yeah. Yeah.
But life was really lovely. I mean, poverty did not automatically mean hunger.
Oh, absolutely.
When we walked from school, we'd see fields that are plowed.
Yeah.
And during this time, if my memory serves me well, we'd be braaiing mealie, and we'd harvest this wild berry when we're coming back. So I grew up in a space where the relationship with nature and production was a lot more direct, and the idea that you could extract some value from nature that benefits you was entrenched in my outlook. Long story short, I moved from there, graduated in rural schools, went to study at Rhodes, majored in journalism and politics, and then went to work at Gucha. Gucha was amazing for me. I come from Rhodes where all my professors were white. I go to Gucha, and it's a mecca of black excellence. Young black executives, everybody studying. They're executives. They are engineers, most of them. They have done MBA. They are currently doing executive MBA with INSEAD. They sit on various company boards. And I get this idea that you are never too busy. I spent a year being an intern at Gucha, and because of I had volunteered while I was a journalism and politics student, I had gained a writing skill, which made me to be editor of our internal comms as an intern. And that created a path to get to be known by the chief executive, who took me to his office. Is now the chief executive at TNPA. Things are going bad there, but this guy he shaped my professional outlook. His view was that executives ought to be developed the same way that Xhosa royals, in fact, African royals were developed. We didn't have schooling that's outside of the processes of the village. So you would make the point that African princes would be compelled from when they are about 9 to attend the meetings of the elders. And
from that's when you get to learn how issues are also settled in the community.
Absolutely. Mandela writes about it in his biography. And so, indeed, I did my practical MBA at Gucha, observing multi-billion decisions, infrastructure decisions being made, investment promotion decisions. And Gucha was really exciting. I mean, it was in 1 year, it was rated the top 5 investment promotion agencies in the world by the World Economic Forum. It was getting awards everywhere. On transformation, by Impumelelo Awards. I don't know if you're familiar with it. They reward companies that are innovating as far as transformation is concerned.
Yeah.
But it was also a professional environment where if you steal milk, you get fired.
Yeah.
If you arrive 1 minute past 8, you get a call from
Yeah.
the chief executive's office
Yeah.
asking why you were late.
Yeah.
If you don't answer your phone within 3 rings, you got in trouble. So this was the environment. And for me, it was therapeutic in the sense that come from not that the professors at Rhodes were not fantastic.
No,
they were.
absolutely.
They were. But
To see another view.
Exactly.
Yes.
Where the
this
person
has-
is like me.
Absolutely. These are psychological cues. And I will come back to Guha because it's a very important part that we want to talk about. What happened to the team? Are they still there?
Sure,
And what actually
sure,
changed?
sure.
More important, were they paid well for? Because this would be skills that would have equally demanded a high salary in private sector.
Yeah.
So I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
But one thing that is common about especially a lot of black people in South Africa is their stories similar to yours about growing up, with being looked after by the grandmother or the grandfather. And I can imagine a lot of our fellow citizens who are white might be translating that as, guys, maybe if you just did parenting better, these things, society will be better.
Yeah.
And I think that materially, underplays the whole role of migrant workers.
Yes.
I just want to get your sense. I mean,
so fortunately, my dad was there,
Yeah.
and my dad was married to a wonderful teacher. My mother, who actually taught me in high school, she is my only surviving parent, my stepmom, at the moment. But both of my mom and dad passed on in old age. But my granddad, it's almost like he was making corrections with us.
Yeah.
At the time that we were growing up, my dad was transitioning from the family homestead to his own. And so, but we had when I arrived in Paddy, I think I spent about 2-3 years with staying at my granddad's place.
Yeah.
But my granddad was a showman.
Yeah.
I was thinking about
Maybe
it
some
now.
of that rubbed off on you.
I cannot deny it. So this guy, I mean, he was a showman. And by the way, you could not disagree with him. He would. I hope that bit didn't stay with me. He would slap guys that disagreed with him about a boxing match about Dingan Tomela, who's recently passed on.
Yeah.
He loved Dingan Tomela. We'd wake up at 4 a.m. Fortunately, we had a generator.
Yeah.
We would watch his boxing matches.
You were the cheese boys. Man.
We look, we were. Until I went to Rhodes.
Yeah. Then you realize it's all relative.
We were. So if you were coming to my village, you would be told, from a distance, you will see a light.
Yeah.
And that was
be
our
your
family.
house.
Because we were the one of 2 or 3 houses that had a generator.
Yeah.
In a cluster of about 10 villages.
Yeah.
So you would see the light. It was a lighthouse, as it were. We Tamkhulu made sure that he was a very generous man.
Yeah.
Very generous.
Yeah.
But a hardcore disciplinarian.
Yeah.
We worked.
You worked, and this is why also the whole concept, when we talk about jobs in South Africa, we'll get to that.
Sure.
But actually, in the upbringing of many people, work was just part of what you did. But the other important thing you mentioned now is that, and I always say to people, even in the informal settlement, there is a rich family. Like, it's hard to get your mind around because, similar. Your story is similar to a lot of people where the poverty makes sense as poverty with hindsight.
Wow.
Everyone was kind of like saying, so when I see someone coming on TV and say, I grew up poor, things were falling apart. And I joke that we had one guy who had soccer boots in our village, but because he was the only one, he had to take them off so that he can fit in with the rest of us.
Wow.
So no one grew up feeling sorry for themselves about. I think the problem we have now is the immediate contrast of Santon and Alexander in the same space, because that's something that just reminds you every morning that's the other part.
It's interesting how profound that is in terms of our self-concept.
That's right.
because as a child you grew up in this and you have a relative sense of confidence. So a cousin of mine actually corrects me. So I've had this thing that my maternal family was poorer than my paternal family.
Yeah.
So I say this in church, and my cousin is there.
Yeah.
So after I've said this, he says to me, "But we weren't poor."
Yeah.
Like he because he remained with my maternal family.
Absolutely. It's like, I don't know what you're talking
Yeah.
about.
So I'm like, is that so? and then he explains
Absolutely.
that our grandmother, whom I regarded as poor,
Yeah.
was our house was the house where everybody who came from the villages arrived at in the urban centers and were looked after with all the meager means. And so I was like,
so they were equally rich by the standard.
Absolutely. And he says, look, we always had people that were coming. But when I'm thinking I'm now in trying to defend myself. I'm like, but our grandmother was working in the kitchens as a domestic. Anyway, it's this thing of conceptions and how it affects your psyche. But thank you, you're sending me now.
Exciting background.
Yeah.
Professionally, what are you working on at the moment? And then we'll get into the tough conversations.
This is an interesting question. What I'm working on, I think I'm in a liminal space. And transition. But what I've enjoyed in the last 10 years is to be an academic. That allows me to be there for my kids. I've been in most of the games. Because in academia we're busy in the morning, and then in the afternoon I go watch the games, and it's been lovely to be in. My wife is in banking, so hardly has the time. But I've enjoyed to do that. And so then I consulted, writing business plans and feasibility studies. Later this afternoon, I have a workshop where I'm talking about what I did with my politics degree. And the reason that is the case, I'm a business plan consultant, right? And that comes from the Kucha experience. I was the humanities train you to be a critical thinker and a critical writer, a competent writer. My experience at Kucha allowed me to transition that competency into a business environment. As a result, I could write business plans. And so that's been my side hustle. And then keynote speaking. And I've enjoyed. This is not a big sector in South Africa like it is in the US.
Nice.
In the US, political consultants are printing money. So I get regular gigs. I'm quite happy about those. And then I'm writing a book on political pathways to inclusion, political economy of South Africa in the 21st century. Like last night I was interviewing a friend of mine who has built a massive agricultural enterprise in the rural areas. And it's amazing how much work is being done there. And I hope to tell stories also of these people that I've interviewed for my book. Hopefully I can interview you also, your journey, what you've seen.
So I wanted to talk about the politics of South Africa, as things stand at the moment. But you touched on Kucha, which is actually an important angle to bring in, because we said we are primarily trying to get professionals involved. Talk about people who were there with skills and all of that, because part of what we are getting from our target audience is that public sector is just so difficult for anyone to go into and work there and get the necessary, the appropriate incentives. Of course, the benchmark is private sector. What was the dynamic there? Were you guys, was the team paid appropriately? Was it competitive salaries? What was the driver there?
Sure, thank you. So, Mike, I thought that this was new. And my colleague, who's a historian, Professor Nomalanga Mkhize, who's the director in our university of school, told me that what the National Party did in creating the IDCs and the other institutions, the IDCs became training ground for professionals.
Yeah.
That those who went to IDC were exposed to, proper business, financing, and all of those things.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, apparently, it was not uncommon for people to move from the IDC into government, into the private sector, and thrive.
Yeah.
She made mention of who these people were. It's just that I don't remember their names.
Yeah.
And so Guga, I said to her, this was Guga.
Yeah.
Guga was led. Okay, it started by a lobby of the business chamber with the ANC government in Nelson Mandela Bay in the aftermath of the transitional local governments. Yeah. When it started, it was in a very visionary mayor who ended up being accused of corruption, and there were some reports being done, Ngcabafaku, he was a visionary. In fact, led one of the best municipalities in the 90s in the country. PE was the best municipality in the country in the 90s. Visionary guy. Yeah. Brought Kucha, they did the initial activism. Yeah. Doug Reed, I think, was there as the chief executive. And then they went and poached Pepe Silinga, an engineer who was working in the presidential projects in Mthatha, to run Kucha. And then when he came, brought in a whole lot of black engineers. Yeah. From Natal, that had graduated from University of Natal. Yeah. Most of them, alumni from St. John's in Mthatha. A very impactful school that has produced a lot of black professionals. The Transkei, this is a story that's not being told significantly. The Transkei has contributed a lot of the intellectual capital, not just of the Eastern Cape, but of a lot in South Africa. Yeah. So education became the thing, that.
Where did that come from? What was the driver? I mean, for Transkei? I mean,
in the early years, there was this thing, because it started from Amamfengu and Mark Gavisa, Thabo Mbeki's biographer, tells the story very nicely about, changing notions of civility during the late 1800s to early 1900s, about Amaqaba and Amaqoboka, the civilized versus the uncivilized. Absolutely. So Amamfengu, in fact, had been the first recipients of education. Yeah. Now, this is interesting politically because Amamfengu had fled KZN into Xhosaland. Yeah. And in Xhosaland, they had the same status as foreign nationals do here. Absolutely. Yes. And they're a vulnerable group. Yeah. They are first to receive missionary education and accept Christianity and become the first cohort of the civilized. Yeah. Okay, so that's the early start. Absolutely. But
that's where the Lovedale School,
the Lovedale, the Hilltown, the Clackberry where Mandela went, the Holy Cross. Yeah. So we have the mushrooming of these schools that produced the first intelligentsia, African intelligentsia, that began, by the way, to write about Nkosi Sikelela, not amaXhosa, but Africa. Yeah. So nationalist ideas, the idea of existence beyond the tribe, began from these intelligentsia. And by the way, they are there in the KZN and elsewhere in the rest of South Africa. Absolutely. And in fact, these guys, this intelligentsia, become the force that helps us to imagine a reality beyond the tribe or the sub-ethnic, the ethnic groups.
It's a different tribe.
Absolutely.
It's a redefinition of a different tribe.
Talking about your call and how there is nothing new under the sun. Yeah. So these guys, which becomes their first intellectual class, imagine the realities and beyond, and they are the seeds of African nationalism. Absolutely. The mobilization across the continent, across the various ethnic groups. Yeah. So it starts from there, really, to have this social capital of educated people that then go on and succeed elsewhere in the rest of the country. So I think St. John's also, I don't know its history particularly, but it's among these schools that, and the homeland governments, by the way, also attempted to stimulate this. I think that's why Mangope was
Mango.
concerned when the democracy came.
When it came.
About Absolutely.
Because but does this explain why the nationalism or ANC type politics is dominated by so many people of Xhosa origin, or is it just a perception?
No, a historian was explaining to me how the Transkei, an area that used to be called British Kaffraria, it was instrumental in the ANC. And obviously we know the KZN, and it was the royals from across the country. But this guy, historian again, I have the pleasure and the honor of being in a department called History and Political Studies. So these colleagues, another colleague in history, Dr. Vusi Khumalo, has written a book about the struggles of black people with education, and how there was an institute here in Joburg somewhere. I forgot what it's called. I'm not a historian, so I don't remember the dates and the names, but the broad trends. That was run by the AME Church, AB Kluma, Pan-Africanist education institution that was like attempting to replicate the stories of Lovedale and others that was run in Joburg, and then the other ones as well. So the point I'm making is that you have a truly nationalist story in the sense that you have a multi-ethnic grouping that is organizing. But Vusi is saying to me, we must not underestimate the influence of that region between a former Transkei and former Transkei in the character and some of the locus of thought within the ANC.
No, by the way, you mentioned earlier your involvement in the taking care of children, and especially with your wife in banking. As we talk about these priorities that are all kind of like just seems like the hard stuff, we also want to bring in the soft aspects of this, which is the professional, we call it the professional wellness, because one of the bubbling problems in South Africa is mental health. So we will bring in other experts who can talk to us about mental health, depression, suicide, imposter syndrome, and imposter experience, and all of that, so that we start to talk about the total being. So that's interesting. So it's really great that you are actively involved in the taking care of the children. I want us to go to the hard stuff, South Africa, where it is 30 years on. But I wanted to just touch on the last thing you mentioned on Kucha. Did that team hold up, or are they still there? Has it been involved? And if not, what happened?
Wow. Kucha was the one place where, for example, I saw a young female executive who was in her 20s, Dr. Bridget Gasa. At the time, she was 27 when I was working as an intern in marketing communications, and then in the CEO's office, handling multi-billion budget. And what had happened to Bridget is that she left university, trained architect, and went into public works when Stella Sitao was the minister. And she says that from 94, and I think she might have joined there late 90s, 98, 97. She says then Stella threw her into the deep end to lead the project of providing accommodation, office accommodation for government departments. And this
as an employee or
as an employee, fresh out of university,
paid well for it.
No, I mean, it's a kid.
But I want to keep coming back to this thing.
I wonder. I've never asked her. I presume.
Because the whole thing of a public service as a calling at the expense of incentives, because all of this, we talk about people who come out of, let's say with hindsight now, poverty, a lot of family issues still to take care of.
Yes.
The monies matter. And I guess part of my challenge is that for as long as we make public service just a calling that says sacrifice everything but just join this for the good of South Africa. So I will keep on asking the question.
I like that.
Where the incentives right?
I think that Pepe used to say development. So money follows development.
Yeah.
Development doesn't follow money.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll come back to that. So I don't know what the question was as far as Stella's time was, but the development that this had on Bridget was amazing.
Absolutely.
Because now she could go and take an executive job.
Absolutely.
At a quasi state-owned company. At the time, it was before this act, so it was a PTY limited company with the shareholder being the state as the only shareholder. Now, at Kucha, they tried to pay well. In the early years, though, it took an executive and an employee of a special kind. Because it was not always guaranteed you were going to get paid at the end of the month.
Absolutely.
Because Kucha, and I tell the story, when Vuyani Chachana resigned at SAA, I wrote the piece to say he missed something. In the public sector, you fight for money. Money doesn't get allocated to you.
Absolutely.
It takes political work behind the scenes. You have to be an executive who is bold enough to engage in political battles, but full of integrity enough not to allow the political space to embroil you in scandal.
Absolutely.
So Kucha, this game was played well. Remember, I'm a political scientist working here, and I'm observing these executives. So I wrote my master's treatise on Kucha creative politicking in post-apartheid South Africa. And there I was looking at how did these guys do resource mobilization in the public space. Enough, play the political game enough to get money, but distant enough to avoid corruption. Now, they were paid a lot. In relative terms, compared to the private sector, absolutely not. But it was not uncommon to see headlines like, Pepe Silinga gets paid more than Mbeki. This way, I mean, and South African media loves this. Compare a politician with a professional. You know, so you had those. They were getting paid. The one thing I loved about Kucha, though, every employee had 25,000 a year to study further. So I only had to pay for my initial registration, which I took a credit card for while I was an intern for my master's. And then the rest, I had become an employee, and then every year thereafter, I got an allocation of this money to pay for my tuition. Everybody was studying at Kucha. The stories, I remember, Sis Beauty, who was a cleaner. By the time I left, Sis Beauty was a receptionist who had studied while she was a cleaner, and she became a receptionist. So there were these stories. I mean, all of us were interns. Friends of mine went on to work for the DTI. By the way, as I interacted with these institutions from the CEO's office, I was amazed at how much talent and young talent was there at DTI. This is the mid-2000s. How much talent was there at the Treasury. How much talent. It was inspiring. And that's why I hate it when in social media the idea is created that we have two options. Either competent black professionals but rogue versus incompetent and clean. Because I was there in the civil service when there was competent and clean.
No, we like the binary view, you know, of the world, right? But my concern with the incentives not being right, I mean, this is why I love that many politicians in South Africa like using Singapore as an example, but they don't want to talk about the means, what got to be done. One of the things Chairman Lee clearly says is, I went and found people with skills and experience, but one of the things he did, he paid them well. Because if we do not do that, the public service then ends up being a training ground, for people just to go and then write out their own checks in private sector. That remains a concern. I mean, I've got a friend who was working for one of the government agencies. He's a PhD, and 5 years, no increase, no bonus. So it's as if you should be staying here out of just wanting to make a big sacrifice in the name of the country.
Kucha, remember, it depended a lot on allocations.
Yeah.
But I was there when the 5-year strategy was done from, I think, 2007 to 2011, where we were setting our own revenue targets, revenue generation.
Yeah.
And at the time, a lot of the infrastructure had been put in there.
Yeah.
We had developed the infrastructure.
Yeah.
We had a consulting arm that continues to operate today that helps government to rapidly roll out infrastructure.
Yeah.
Because we'd learned the competences of contracting in good faith. There's a lot of bad faith contracting in the public service.
Yeah.
It's really something that pains me. Kucha, before there was a verification regime for BEE, Kucha was causing problems everywhere. Doing verifications for every procurement project, for every procurement they were doing. The national verification agencies came after Kucha had been doing it for years. Anyway, I'm digressing, but the people were paid significantly well. Then I remember that's why I say Kucha was a practical MBA, balanced scorecard, and perspectives of the balanced scorecard and the was it personal development organization? I'm forgetting that fourth perspective. Long been out there. There it had to do with organizational learning. How is and then how you incentivize learning. So the performance management framework was geared, and the bonuses was geared for both for individual performance, but it only accounted for 40% of your total. The rest was team. Business unit, sub-unit, business unit, and then the corporate performance. That got us. So at Kucha, it's only in academia where I've seen like competitiveness. At Kucha, if there was a new guy, I remember a new chartered accountant that had joined the commercial team that negotiates with investors, deals. After the investment promotion guys have cultivated the deal to now signing lease agreements. When these guys were coming in, there would be new darlings of the, new guy who's has got this experience. So we had this thing of embracing talent.
That's amazing.
I remember Alan Young. We changed a CFO. Alan Young came from Isuzu, Delta at the time. What was GMSA? When he arrived, he says, "Wow, I have never seen an organization with such a high concentration of highly educated people, never mind black." So it was a fascinating environment to be in. Young, some degree of arrogance, highly educated black executives and senior management. So it was, anyway, as you can see, it makes me light up.
Absolutely.
Your question, it remained sustainable. It's now consulting to the rest of the continent in investment in setting up special economic zones. There was a slight issue in the transition of leadership. Chief executive stayed there for 20 years. And then a guy who had been an insider but moved to banking, Kwezitia, took over. At the moment, there's some slight problems there as far as the leadership of course is concerned. Is currently on suspension. Pepe is on suspension at TNPA. But save for those, the transitions have been fairly well.
I hope that is sustained.
Likewise.
So interestingly, much of your work, you talk about inclusion, transformation. Later, as we come closer to the end, I'll ask you the typical South African binary question. You sound communist. And are you capitalist or communist? We'll get to that.
By the way, last issue on this thing about Outlook. When I arrived in PE, and I think that either you mentioned it in another interview or you asked me. When I arrived in Gqeberha, I went to visit a church and then I visited another. This other one that I visited was Victory Ministries International, run by a businessman who had built a construction business in Joburg, Jerome Liberty, and then got a calling to go and plant a church there.
Yeah.
What attracted me, because I saw you ask a question about the role of the faith space in terms of getting the psyche that's necessary for development.
Absolutely.
I get here and I'm like, wow, when this guy is preaching, he's reconciling my spirituality with my politics.
Yeah.
Because he preached things like, success is not going to come from a certificate that's hanging on a wall.
Yeah.
You have to have excellence.
Yeah.
You have to, anyway, something that rattled me a little bit, he would say, it's not BEE that's going to get you wealthy.
Yeah.
What's going to get you wealthy is an excellent spirit, working effectively.
But why is that binary? Why is that either or?
Look, this was important in the community I was in.
Yeah.
It's a largely black community.
Yeah.
Where the next success, the people we were seeing succeed were tenderpreneurs. And this was an important message to be mentioned.
Absolutely.
And also, I say I could not have heard at the right time that a certificate on the wall is not what.
Absolutely.
So he's big on education,
Absolutely.
but he was very clear to say, what's the use of getting education for speaking English in the shebeen?
Yeah.
And not translating that to something that so it makes he loves the book of Proverbs.
Yeah.
How a wise person leaves an inheritance not for his children but his children's children.
Absolutely.
So I saw this messaging around how it was God's desire to restore the Eastern Cape. And I was like, otherwise it would be incomplete spirituality if all that we had to do was to wait for the sweet by and by.
Absolutely.
And there was no part of saying there's going to be a mass a transformation of our economic well-being while we're on earth. So this was, but how important was the role of us as individuals in that process, even as we continue to fight for institutions to transform. I thought I'd bring that
we
about.
We have to see the whole being until we talk about the whole being, the mental wellness, spiritual wellness. Interestingly, the history of not only of South Africa, much of the world, religion features a lot. I mean, even in the history of South Africa here, the arrival of the Huguenots coming out of French persecution by the Catholics bring with them here very Calvinist aspects, and that become the center of the identity of a new tribe, the Afrikaners in South Africa. So, but I want to move on to 30 years of democracy. Now, this is what professionals are saying. Like, so the good, the bad, the ugly, what would be your view? You've got a oversight view of what's happening in South Africa. What did we get right? What were we kind of just moderate on? What's the bad? And then we can talk about the future.
Okay. The baseline as far as access to services and democratizing municipal services was done very significantly well, such that by the late 2000s, if you looked at the metros, their service delivery or service connection rates, like the rate of people who have access to water, either at home or within a 200-meter radius, electrification and other things, these had gone well. To the extent, by the way, that you would see closer to local government elections, you would see service delivery protests, which were ANC versus ANC, a guy that wanted to come in and a rhetoric that there hadn't been service delivered in a particular place. When you find that there's a clinic that's been built, except that there's been delays in delivering houses that were approved. So this guy wants to now become councillor by pushing this housing delivery project. So the demands from around the mid-2000s started to be about what more communities could get from the system. Indeed, in about 20 shortly after the 2011 survey, you had places where, for example, in Silvertown in Nelson Mandela Bay was regarded as the worst place to have lived in South Africa since 1994, because there had not been any development there. But if you look at, the housing program for me is a lot, as far as, upgrading of informal settlements, places where people had lived under dangerous electricity cables, former dump sites, and other places. So greenfields development, in situ developments, a lot of these happened. Now, I think that we sabotaged the state project in South Africa. Because not only was there some significant traction gained as far as infrastructure, social and economic infrastructure delivery was concerned, but also government had started this system of merit-based accreditation of lower structures of government for what else could be devolved to them. And we've done it in two things: metropolis as well as housing. So in housing, you could become an accredited municipality because you showed competences to deliver housing. And Nelson Mandela Bay, City of Cape Town, I think Joburg and a few others had been able to grow to this level. What happened was that there was a very deliberate attempt to an anti-professional environment.
Inside government. Two
things happened. The ANC in Polokwane decided to end what they called two centers of power. Two, they decided to kill the scorpions. Those two resolutions, for me, they created problems for us. One, because by killing this principle of sometimes separation of party and state based on who is leading the region and who's leading the council, the marrying of those two created a very untenable situation in terms of which power became absolute in a region, in a province, and at a national level. In the party office. And what that did was to create an overbearing party that could actually control even processes of implementing Auditor General findings. In fact, never mind Auditor General, internal audit findings in municipalities, in government departments. Because now, all of a sudden, the person who was the director for IDP was your regional head at the party, or was in this regional structure, even if they were not, because the chairperson became the mayor. Now, obviously, local government legislation changed to respond to those things, but that development of the party office as the locus of power caused government to cave in to corrupt elements.
Absolutely.
And at a time when you had clipped the power of the scorpions. So people, the administrative mechanism that pushed back against corruption was no longer there. And you had a culture of rampant corruption. Was there corruption from 94? Absolutely. But there was a concerted effort to deal with it.
Absolutely.
From Aju 2009, when that decision was given effect, no, actually, somebody, I think it may have been Kgalema who actually started implementing that resolution. And for me, bad news happened. Where
that was the beginning of a whole lot of issues.
Yes, but also, it was not just the political environment. There was opportunistic behavior in the level of the administration. Where lunatics began to run amok. And leverage the political situation. And do their own things. So it became a systemic issue to actually ransack the public purse. And I think that in that we sabotaged the state project.
How do we come out of it? What do we need to do? And are we heading towards being a failed state, or is South Africa? There's also an element of we are exceptional. There's exceptionalism. I'm interested in getting a sense of what you're seeing in South Africa. Is it what has been seen elsewhere? because often the future is just a repetition of the past. What would save us from the mess we are in at the
Sure,
moment?
sure. So there are paths. There's the political path, which the ANC has been involved at ANC because they are the governing party in some degree of success.
Yeah.
They've been involved in that, and it's kind of worked for them, in the sense that you've seen the ANC begin to introduce things like qualifying criteria for leadership. It had always been there. I mean, through the eye of the needle, in the early 2000s, and then in the late 2000s, leading up to the Mangaung conference, the document on leadership renewal, and the resolutions on organizational renewal in the Zuma years. And if you listen to every political report that President Zuma gave to conference, he is talking about the need to curb corruption and the need to clean up house. Okay. Anyway, but we see the Integrity Commission formed during Zuma's time gained steam from 2017 when the ANC conference decided to give it more teeth. But the point I'm making is that there are internal party-based processes to clean up. They have not given us as much traction as we would have wanted.
Can they work? I mean, because they also talk renewal now. But I think the question I'm personally and the team that's working with us and is grappling with is that there seems to be this disconnect between the people who are bringing you the numbers, the voters, who may not necessarily have the skills required to rise, right? They come with a constituency, right? And you need numbers, right? So, I mean, someone like a David Makura as an example, I think it's a fairly competent person. But I doubt he will have the numbers that are able to bring him through the system in there. Is it working?
So that's the last frontier in the ANC. The nature of how you assume political office. At the moment, it's too elite controlled. That thing of power is just rhetoric. Elites control power bases, hence your argument about constituencies. So that's the last mile. They haven't even touched it. They tried with the modernizing membership and making it electronic, because part of the problem was this thing of members, where people know that they've got voting fodder whom they can simply instruct, we are voting this way and these people vote this way. So holding that constant, which is, I say, is the last frontier, it's going to need to be dealt with. Because this gives the elite brokers too much power, huge power. But interestingly, those elite brokers only control internal party constituencies. The numbers of people that vote for the ANC are way more than the internal actors, even taking all of the branches and their membership. Because at any given time, they would say between 700 and 1 million. And their voters have been 10 million, which is nearly 10 times the people who are operating internally within the party. So, and I'm happy that they're showing sensitivity to that reality. So, I mean, if you look at the qualifying criteria for mayors, first in 21, the qualifying criteria for councillors, the need to have communities participate, the qualifying criteria for mayors. In 2019, they missed bringing those elements into leadership selection in provinces. But in this election, I watched that debate and how, interestingly, this idea about qualifying has now become a key issue in the ANC, which is a good thing. So those are the reforms. But in the final analysis, it was power broking that actually determined who gets to go to parliament. Absolutely. But I wouldn't say it didn't work completely. It was known in ANC politics, you cannot touch the Secretary General.
But therein lies the challenge, in the sense that if, for example, you said let's charge everyone who needs to be charged in government, the problem is you end up having to charge pretty much everyone, you know. And so therefore, when you say, okay, we need qualified people to come in, that actually exclude a whole lot of people, but those people come with constituency. They come with
Yeah.
they come with numbers.
So you need to deal with the stranglehold that these people have on internal party constituencies. I argue the point.
Yeah, I see.
Because remember, the rest of society cares little with the internal. And that's why the general voters have been withdrawing support from the ANC since 2009. And the trend has been has not been reversed. So for that purpose, for that reason, they also know that they have to deal with this issue. But you're quite right. For now, what you have is a compromise between being sensitive to the voter and being sensitive to internal party brokers. But I think it's the last election where this is a big issue. Maybe 26 will be the last election where this is a big issue. I don't think that they can go to the 2029 election with this mentality.
Are we heading towards a failed state?
We have elements in which we've reached that. Unfortunately, in terms of internal threats to the authority of the state, I'm happy about the pushback in KZN. But that pushback is setting very difficult precedents to deal with. I mean, you have a special forces guy who heads the commission, the police there. People are raving about him on social media because he's our last hope as far as taking the fight against the rogues. But I had the honor of playing golf with Bulelani Ngcuka recently. And he say, and when I say, what else can be done? He says, look, bro, from the, and I hope he gives me permission to say this, well, I'll apologize. He says, in the 90s and early 2000s, South Africa was this violent. You have taxi bosses this side. You had gangs this other side. And these people had actually, remember, we had been in chaos since the late 70s. So he says to me, we had a way to deal with this, which was not extrajudicial killings like what's happening in KZN. He says, when we started the Hollywood-style arrests by the Scorpions, it was not just to deal with politicians. It was to deal with organized crime. And he says, how we dealt with these things was through these. And he tells a story of how in Gqeberha, his team there were going to pounce on a guy that was known for, to be an underworld leader. And how they said, you have to be here when we pounce on this guy so that the media can come. So there was a deliberate strategy to go after the big wigs and put up a show. And he says, through these, in Mthatha, we had prosecution-led investigations that dealt with taxi violence. And we arrested these guys that were kingpins. And all of a sudden, in the mid-2000s, we had gained control. So I was telling him about how what General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi is doing is similar to what Rodrigo Duterte did in Manila in the Philippines and succeeded. And then they made him to be the president of the country, and he started to do that same thing. So I was happy. I said to him, you know what? I'm happy to learn that we have actually had an alternative to what is happening in KZN. Do I say what Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi is doing I think is Lieutenant General? We probably, for now, given the mess that we are in, need a little. He must stop when we have this success from the prosecutions led. Otherwise, it's going to be chaos. So I'm saying we have reached levels of failed state, because remember, state failure is, if power is effective, this is a political science adage. Power is effective when you don't have to use it.
Absolutely.
When the threat of its use
is sufficient.
If you must use it, you've now lost it.
No, absolutely.
And also what worries me is how Minister Bekicele says some of the weaponry that is being used by these groups like the Zamazamas and others is weaponry that is not being used by our security forces, which suggests that we are involved in an international movement of arms, which is dangerous for our country. So in many ways we have, but as a hopeless optimist as I am, I'm happy that there's pushback in different parts, and that in many parts we remain a very good and viable country in which the rule of law still has the final say.
Give me the silver lining as we close, right? So I am an average professional and I'm looking at this, and I argue that some of the professionals pay as much as 80% in taxes if you factor in many other things that they don't have to pay for, right? What can I do? I want to build a better South Africa. If it is not for my generation, at least for my children. What can I do? Maybe the more difficult question and personal question, what are you doing to build a better South Africa? Are you writing a book for 12 million rand for anyone?
Please let me know who I can build 12 million for my book, talking about you and the need for proper incentives. So first of all, congratulations to you and the citizens in mobilizing professionals to think about this and actually have these platforms like this. Because remember, again, there's a saying in political science that when you want to bring about change, you must first be involved in a process of making things that are taken for granted strange. When the idea that we must pay 80% of taxes becomes strange, no longer taken for granted, that is the natural order of things, then we begin to say, what can we do? So awareness is very much a revolutionary part of the process. Every revolution was once a thought in one man's mind, as one wise person said. So we start at the level of thought. This is what Biko actually does in the political lull of the mid-60s to early 70s, when he begins to inject into the socio-political system the idea of there's a better way. To do things, there's a better way to be. And that actually becomes the galvanizing philosophy that gets expressed in political activism. So what we are doing is by no means minuscule in terms of its impact. Personally, what I decided to do was to say, okay, I teach, I raise awareness, but also I counter alarmist rhetoric from either the left or the right. To say to investors, domestic and foreign, there's the chances that you're going to see a doomsday coalition, even if the ANC could go into a coalition with MKP and EFF, are zero. And then I explain why. The ANC had 2/3 majority, but was its own coalition, and did not do the worst.
Absolutely.
Zuma came into power and still had good power in the 60s. When he was confronted by Julius Malema, Floyd, Minister of Justice Ronald Lamola, and Cindy Somagaqa, God bless his soul, that were pushing for away from the center left to a radical left path, Zuma's ANC had the political experience to mediate those agitations and come up from that with things like, instead of nationalizing the mines, let's update the Minerals and Petroleum Resources Development Act. Now, the DA complains a lot about it, but the Minerals and Petroleum Resources Development Act, for me, is a midway, if you like. It can, you can plot it along that continuum from center left to center right.
Absolutely.
The DA sees it as ultra left.
Yeah.
Okay. So I argue, if a party has got experience in the democratic period, mediating tensions since 96, by the way, since 96, the ANC has been mediating agitations for
and balancing all sorts of different interests. Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah.
How is an ANC that has proved experience in mediating policy interests when it had 2/3 majority and when it had outright majority, all of a sudden, when it no longer has any majority and has to rely on coalitions, now going to be able to actually cower to these interests? And then I argue the point also that South Africa is bigger than the political.
Yeah.
And in fact, you make this point. I was quite pleasantly surprised to hear it, that there is a relative autonomy between the political, the business, and somewhat the social spaces in South Africa.
Yeah.
To the extent that business throughout history, and Peter Blanche makes this point, that business has never been a victim of any political settlement in this country. It's always been the overbearing, scheming, and to borrow from Ter Blanche, myth-making group that generates myths about some danger that's coming, and then extracts the maximum capital.
Absolutely, it's
and
interesting that throughout much of South African history, if you follow the capital accumulation, crisis, and resolution, it tells you a lot more about the history of South Africa. But even up to today, business is still able to cry victim.
It's myth-making.
Dr. Ongama, I think I'm going to have to bring you back to talk about whether you're communist or capitalist. But for today, we are going to stop here. Thank you very much. This has been very, very, very enlightening, very educational. I hope it will also help our target audience, the professionals and the youth, to start to make sense of a more balanced view of the dynamics in South Africa. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks to you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. Like, subscribe, share this, so that more people have got exposure to this type of discussions. We are going to keep on bringing you bigger, better, more guests, more opinion shapers, as we all start to grapple with all these different dynamics of make South Africa tick. But all we are asking is, wherever you are, anywhere in South Africa, you can make a difference. Thank you very much.